This is chapter 7 of When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit. As Anna went on attending the village school, she liked it more and more. She made friends with the other girls, apart from Vernelli, and especially with Roselli, who sat next to her in class and was a little less sedate than the rest. The lessons were so easy that she was able to shine without any effort, and though Herr Grauper was not a very good teacher of the more conventional subjects, he was a remarkable yodeler. Altogether, what she liked best about the school was that it was so different from the one she'd been to before. She felt sorry for Max, who seemed to be doing very much the same things at the Zurich High School as he had done in Berlin. There was only one thing that bothered her. She missed playing with boys. In Berlin, she and Max had mostly played with a mixed group of both boys and girls, and it had been the same at school. Here, the girls' endless hopscotch began to bore her, and sometimes in breaks she looked longingly at the more exciting games and acrobatics of the boys. One day, there was no one even playing hopscotch. The boys were turning cartwheels, and all the girls were sitting demurely watching them out of the corner of their eyes. Even Rosalie, who had cut her knee, was sitting with the rest. Vernelli was particularly interested because the big red-haired boy was trying to turn cartwheels and the others were trying to teach him, but he kept flopping over sideways. "Would you like to play hopscotch?" Anna asked her, but Vernelli shook her head, absorbed. It really was too silly, especially as Anna loved turning cartwheels herself, and it wasn't as though the red-haired boy was any good at it. Suddenly she could stand it no longer, and without thinking what she was doing, she got up from her seat among the girls and walked over to the boys. "Look," she said to the red-haired boy, "you've got to keep your legs straight like this," and she turned a cartwheel to show him. All the other boys stopped turning cartwheels and stood back grinning. The red-haired boy hesitated. "It's quite easy," said Anna. "You could do it if you'd only remember about your legs." The red-haired boy still seemed undecided, but the other boys shouted, "Go on, try." So he tried again and managed a little better. Anna showed him again, and this time he suddenly got the idea and turned a perfect cartwheel just as the bell went for the end of break. Anna walked back to her own group, and all the boys watched and grinned, but the girls seemed mostly to be looking elsewhere. Vernelli looked frankly cross, and only Rosalie gave her a quick smile. After break it was history, and Herr Grauper decided to tell them about the cavemen. They had lived millions of years ago, he said. They killed wild animals and ate them and made their fur into clothes. Then they learned to light fires and make simple tools and gradually became civilized. This was progress, said Herr Grauper, and one way it was brought about was by peddlers who called at the caveman's caves with useful objects for barter. "What sort of useful objects?" asked one of the boys. Herr Grauper peered indignantly over his beard. "All sorts of things would be useful to a caveman," he said. "Things like beads and coloured wools and safety pins to fasten their furs together." Anna was very surprised to hear about the peddlers and the safety pins. She longed to ask Herr Grauper whether he was really sure about them, but thought perhaps it would be wiser not to. Anyway, the bell went before she had the chance. She was still thinking about the cavemen so much on the way home to lunch that she and Vernelli had walked nearly halfway before she realised that Vernelli was not speaking to her. "What's the matter, Vernelli?" she asked. Vernelli tossed her thin plaits and said nothing. "What is it?" asked Anna again. Vernelli wouldn't look at her. "You know," she said. "You know perfectly well." "No, I don't," said Anna. "You do," said Vernelli. "No, honestly, I don't," said Anna. "Please tell me." But Vernelli wouldn't. She walked the rest of the way home without giving Anna a single glance, her nose in the air and her eyes fixed on some distant point. Only when they'd reached the inn and were about to separate did she look at her briefly, and Anna was surprised to see that she was not only angry but nearly in tears. "Anyway," Vernelli shouted over her shoulders as she ran off, "anyway, we all saw your knickers." During lunch with Mamma and Papa, Anna was so quiet that Ma noticed it. "Anything bother you at school?" she asked. Anna considered. There were two things which had bothered her. One was Vernelli's extraordinary behaviour, and the other was Herr Grauper's account of the cavemen. She decided that the business about Vernelli was too complicated to explain, and said instead, "Mamma, did the cavemen really pin their furs together with safety pins?" This produced such a flood of laughter, questions and explanations that they lasted until the end of lunch, and then it was time to go back to school. Vernelli had already left, and Anna, feeling a little lonely, went on her own. The afternoon lesson was singing again, with a lot of yodelling, which Anna enjoyed, and when it was over she suddenly found the red-haired boy standing in front of her. "Hello, Anna," he said boldly. Some of his friends who were with him laughed, and before Anna could answer they'd all turned on the heel and marched out the classroom. "Why did he say that?" asked Anna. Rosalie smiled. "I think you're going to have an escort," she said, and added, "Poor Vernelli." Anna would have liked to ask her what she meant, but the mention of Vernelli reminded her that she must be quick if she didn't want to walk home alone. So she said, "See you tomorrow," and ran. There was no sign of Vernelli in the playground. Anna waited for a while, in case she might be in the cloakroom, but she didn't appear. The only people in the playground were the red-haired boy and his friends, who also seemed to be waiting for someone. Vernelli must have rushed off early, especially to avoid her. Anna went on hoping a little longer, but at last she had to admit to herself that it was no use and set off on her own. The red-haired boy and his friends decided to leave at exactly the same time. It was less than 10 minutes' walk back to the Gasthofsfern, and Anna knew the way well. Outside the school gate she turned right and walked down the road. After a few moments she noticed that the red-haired boy and his friends had also turned right outside the school. The road led to a steep path covered in gravel which joined another road, and this in turn, after some twists and turns, led to the inn. It was while Anna was walking down the gravel path that she first began to wonder whether everything was as it should be. The gravel was thick and very loose, and her feet made a loud crunching sound at every step. Presently she became aware of similar, more muffled crunchings behind her. She listened to them for a few moments, then glanced over her shoulder. It was the red-haired boy and his friends again. Their shoes were dangling from their hands, and they were trudging through the gravel in their bare feet, apparently untroubled by the sharpness of the stones. Even Anna's brief glance had been enough to show her that they were watching her. She walked more quickly, and the steps behind her quickened also. Then a little stone bounced off the gravel to one side of her. While she was still wondering where it had come from, another little stone hit her on the leg. She turned round sharply and was just in time to see the red-haired boy pick up a bit of gravel and throw it at her. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "Stop it!" But he just grinned and threw another bit. Then his friends began to throw some too. Most of it missed her, and any stones that did hit her were too small to hurt, but it was horrid just the same. Then she saw a small bandy-legged boy, hardly bigger than herself, pick up a whole handful of gravel. "Don't you dare throw that at me," she shouted so fiercely that the bandy-legged boy automatically took a step backwards. He threw the gravel in her direction, but deliberately aimed short. Anna glared at him. The boy stood staring back at her. Suddenly the red-haired boy took a step forward and shouted something. The others took it up in a sort of chant. "Anna, Anna," they chanted. Then the red-haired boy threw another bit of gravel and hit her squarely on the shoulder. It was too much. She turned and fled. Down the path, bits of gravel bouncing all around her, peppering her back, her legs. "Anna, Anna." They were coming after her. Her feet slipped and slithered on the stones. If only she could get to the road, at least they wouldn't be able to throw gravel at her. But there it was, lovely, smooth, hard asphalt under her feet. "Anna, Anna." They were gaining ground. Now they were no longer stopping to pick up gravel. They were coming on faster. Suddenly a large object hurled past her. A shoe. They were throwing their shoes at her. At least they'd have to stop to pick them up. She rounded a bend and could see the Gasthof fern at the end of the road. The last bit was downhill, and she almost threw herself down the slope as with one final effort she reached the courtyard of the inn. "Anna, Anna." Boys right behind her, shoes raining all around, and there, like a miracle, like an avenging angel, was Mamma. She shot out of the inn like a torpedo. She grabbed the red-haired boy and slapped him. She hit another one with his own shoe. She flung herself into the group and scattered them. All the time she was shouting, "Why are you doing this? What's the matter with you?" That was what Anna wanted to know too. Then she saw that Mamma had got hold of the bandy-legged boy and was shaking him. All the rest had fled. "Why did you chase her?" Mamma was asking. "Why did you all throw things at her? What had she done?" The bandy-legged boy scowled and wouldn't say. "I won't let you go," said Mamma. "I won't let you go until you tell me why you did it." The bandy-legged boy looked hopelessly at Mamma. Then he blushed and mumbled something. "What?" said Mamma. Suddenly the bandy-legged boy grew desperate. "Because we love her," he shouted at the top of his voice. "We did it because we love her." Mamma was so surprised that she let go of him, and he shot away from her across the courtyard and away down the road. "Because they love you," said Mamma to Anna. Neither of them could understand it, but when later they consulted Max, he didn't seem very surprised. "It's what they do here," he said. "When they're in love with anyone, they throw things at them." "But good heavens, there were 6 of them," said Mamma. "Surely there must be other ways for them to express their love." Max shrugged. "It's what they do," he said, and added, "Really, Anna should feel honoured." A few days later, Anna saw him in the village throwing unripe apples at Rosalie. Max was very adaptable. Anna was not too sure about going back to school the next day. "Suppose they're still in love with me today," she said. "I don't want to have more things thrown at me." She need not have worried. The boys had been so terrified by Mamma that none of them dared so much as look at her. Even the red-haired boy kept his eyes carefully averted. So Vronelli forgave her, and they were friends as before. Anna even managed to persuade her to try one cartwheel secretly in a corner at the back of the inn. But in public at school, they both stuck strictly to hopscotch. That's the end of chapter 7.